A very good evening. On behalf of India International Center, I extend a warm welcome to the distinguished speakers on the dais and to all the invitees who have joined us this evening for this book discussion. Delving into concepts ranging from the human condition to finding one's purpose in life and the key to lasting happiness, whether we are looking at strengthening our relationships, discovering our true potential, understanding how to do well at work, or even how we give back to the world. The author takes us on an unforgettable journey with his precious insights on some of these aspects of life, distills his experiences and lessons into a light-hearted, thought-provoking book that possibly will help one align oneself with the life one wants to live by sharpening one's moral compass and resolving the ethical dilemmas of life. Ladies and gentlemen, this evening we are going to discuss the book, The Moral Compass, Finding Balance and Purpose in an Imperfect Way, authored by Sri Hardayal Singh and an introduction by Sri Gurcharan Das. The session is going to be moderated by Sri Suhas Borkar. And now I request Mr. Borkar to take the session forward. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Usha Munshi. Shri Gurcharan Das, Ambassador Shyam Saran, my friend, Ambassador Pawan Verma. Alka Basu couldn't join us, she fell sick. So she called up from Cornell that she'll have to be excused. And we are still awaiting Lord Meghnad Desai. My friend and author of the book we are going to discuss today, Hardayal Singh, Hardy to me and my family. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow members of IIC. Hardy was a very close friend of my elder brother, Shekhar, from school. Hardy is 7 years my senior, and from the time I can remember, he has been a close family friend, an epitome of integrity and rectitude, to the point that Hardy was chosen by my late mother to be the prime witness to a will. Likewise, my late brother chose Hardy to be the prime witness to his will also. Also, another commonality I share with Hardy, he was the editor of the school magazine, Sandesh, in 1963-64, and I took over the editorship of the magazine 7 years later, 70-71. Hardy's book, Moral Compass, is symptomatic of a mindset which finds balance and purpose in an imperfect world. Hardy makes us negotiate a minefield of ethical and moral dilemmas from the first story of Ram Prasad, who refused to hire a man who had brought with him a briefcase containing the stolen bid documents of a rival company and was fired for professional ineptitude. But he kept his moral compass, to the 17th story of Atulya Banerjee, the whistleblower who was finally vindicated and his charges against the chairperson of the bank stood substantiated. Atulya had to pay a heavy cost for his honesty, but he kept his moral compass. In story number 8 in the book, which highlights the personalities of Professor Satish Dhawan, the father of Indian aerospace, and India's former President Dr. Abdul Kalam, all characters in this book are fictional. When the mission failed, Professor Dhawan took the rap himself. But when the mission succeeded, he asked Dr. Kalam to address the national press alone. Professor Dhawan exemplified the incredible power of humility. Here, Hardy quotes Solomon Schimmel to say that humility is compatible with both creativity and fulfillment. Hardy spent 37 years in the Indian Revenue Service. In fact, he and Ambassador Shyam Saran joined the civil service the same year, 1970. Now, I want to take you all a little away from the book, but very much within the ambit of the moral compass. The Indian Income Tax Department says that only 1.46 crore people 1.12% of the population pay income tax. In the US, about 42.9% households pay income tax. In the in the UK, if Lord Desai would have been here, he would have vouched for this, 56% of the population pay income tax. Now, this question of a minuscule percentage of the Indian population paying income tax must have engaged the serious attention of officers of the Indian Revenue Service like Hardy. How a simple bill receipt can help raise income tax collections and root out corruption in India. Unlike the West, if you go to any shop in India to buy anything, the shopkeeper either presumes that you don't want to pay tax on the purchase, so you do not need a bill, invoice, receipt, or he'll ask you, do you need a bill? You say yes. The next thing he'll say is, you'll have to pay tax. This, of course, does not apply to the small number of big stores or the store chains we have, which are monitored in the tax net. This is how black money is generated across the country, and the government loses its legitimate revenue and black money is generated. No one wants to curb this or change this scenario because it suits everyone, especially the small politicians and the low level of bureaucracy. This is how unaccounted political collections or chanda are generated at the street level. This is how speed money or rishwat or ghoos or upar se paisa for the lowest level of bureaucracy, police, etc., is demanded to get anything done. Naturally, the tentacles of all this go up to the top of the political and bureaucratic echelons. Huge amounts of this go into political party collections. Big time money is invested into gold or real estate through benami or proxy deals. And this is such a network of shell outfits that it becomes very difficult to trace, leave alone prosecute. This gets much more serious if you take the case of a professional person like a medical doctor. A doctor normally works as a consultant in a hospital for a fixed salary. At the same time, he charges consultancy charges from patients, something like 1,500 per person. No bill receipt is given. So the doctor only shows the fixed salary he gets from the hospital as income and not the consultancy fees. If he sees 30 patients a day for 25 days in a month, he gets unaccounted money of rupees 11,25,000 per month. And that's how, again, the black money is generated. The small politicians and the low-level bureaucracy, including the police, is very aware of this scenario, leading to the demand of cuts at the street level and the formation of a network of corruption in India, starting at the bottom and going to the top. The aim is to have the provisions of the Consumer Protection Act 2019, Section 2, 47(7) enforced. The aforementioned provision, not issuing bill or cash memo or receipt for the goods sold or services rendered, constitutes an unfair trade practice, but this provision is not being implemented and needs to be enforced rigorously. The objective is to ensure that every sale gets a bill receipt. Internet facilities would need to be upgraded. Computer literacy and software would have to be provided in rural areas. But the gains in rooting out corruption, creating an atmosphere of transparency, and of course, generating tax collections would make this a very worthwhile endeavor and for far-reaching impact on our democratic polity. I would like you to give this a thought. How a simple bill receipt can help raise income tax collections and root out corruption in India. Now I would like Hardayal Singh to take the floor. Before that, can we have a photo up with the book, please? Thank you.
Friends, I'm delighted to be amidst you this evening. But the time is short, and I don't want to overshoot the time allocated to me. So let me straight away go to the heart of the matter. The moral compass is a collection of 17 short stories, or if you like, case studies, with an introduction by Mr. Gurcharan Das and an epilogue in the end. The Moral Compass is a book about all the moral and ethical dilemmas which all of us face in our daily life, both at home and at work. When you read this book, I'm quite certain that you will be able to empathize with the protagonists of the different stories. This is because they're all well-meaning professionals, heroically trying to find out what is right, and then taking courage in their own hands to go and do it. There are two reasons why I wrote this book. First of all, I wanted to share the insights which I gained over 39 years of public service. 6 of these were spent in an organization where I must have gone through at least 18,000 statements of defense of charged officers. Believe me, this was far from a pleasant task, but it had to be done. This assignment, however, did give me an opportunity to gain some insights into why people deviate from the straight and narrow path. So I thought if I write a book, it would provide me an opportunity to share these insights with a larger audience. The second reason why I decided to write this book was that I found that all of us, me included, flounder when we have to take big decisions. This may be because we are emotionally involved. But I asked myself that if I'm going to write this book, can I undertake a study to find out and share with everyone how we can introduce or restore greater objectivity and fairness in our decision making. While writing this book, I went through various philosophies. I tried to study the various philosophies of both East and West. And now that the task is over, I find that it's absolutely remarkable that all of them should emphasize the importance of good conduct. So this excellence in conduct becomes a common legacy which we all share, irrespective of our religious and cultural differences. It's a legacy, a heritage we can draw upon whenever we are in trouble. I do hope that there's nothing dogmatic in this book. each story, each chapter is anchored in a story and talks about certain values we all respect. Yet, I've tried to leave it open to the reader to decide for himself whether he would act similarly or differently. It's quite possible that someone who reads the book may say that, look, given the circumstances, I would have acted differently. And that's perhaps as it should be. It's my fond hope that this book will provide some material for debate and discussion. At the end of the day, friends, each of us has to find his or her own dharma. This concept, which reoccurs in this book, is a concept which has evolved over thousands of years. Each generation has interpreted and reinterpreted it to the changed circumstances of the times. It is also open enough, flexible enough for us to search for ourselves our own path of excellence, which we may want to pursue. Well, friends, at the end of the day, each of us has to traverse his own road to freedom, happiness, and peace. Before I conclude, may I leave a small thought behind with you. Whether it's an individual or a nation, there are no free lunches in life. Everything has to be paid for sooner or later by someone. All we have to do is to find out that if we have selected a package of values which we want to pursue, we have to see whether we are willing to pay the commensurate cost and whether the benefits we get are commensurate to the costs we incur. The journey to happiness is always intensely personal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hardy, for that brief intro. Can I now request Gurcharan Das to come in? Each one of us, as Hardy just said, has to find his or her dhamma. It's an unending quest, and we have to negotiate a minefield of dilemmas.
Yes, this is a book of moral dilemmas. And the first thing to say is that I enjoyed reading it. So much so that I was delighted and privileged when I was asked to write an introduction to it. The moral compass that is referred to in the title is another word for dharma, and a personal dharma. And the question that this book poses is, can one depend on this moral compass to protect one in this scary, hazy, imperfect world? Hardayal has offered 17 absorbing, short, and charming stories to illustrate these moral dilemmas. So, since I don't want to give away the plot or the ending of the stories to you, potential readers, I shall speak in the next 5 minutes about some of the principles behind which principles which underlie these moral dilemmas. I shall only say that the stories, these 17 stories together, hold up a mirror to each of us, forcing us to confront the many ways we deceive ourselves. Some of the dilemmas deal with the problem of the conflict between duties that we face. Others raise the question, do ends justify the means? So I thought that instead of giving away his endings and his stories, I'll illustrate these with similar stories of my own for a few minutes. The classic problem is, do you judge a moral deed by an action based on the intention of the individual actor, the moral actor, or on the consequences of the action? This is an old controversy between philosophers. And let me illustrate this with a true story, actually. It was a story I read in the Times of India in 2002, I think, of a child who almost drowned on the beach in Candolim beach in Goa. Pawan would know it because we last met near there. A child was drowning, and a young man jumped into the sea and saved this child. The reporter of the Times went to him and asked him, "You're a hero. Why did you do it?" The young man sheepishly confessed that he was trying to impress a girl in his college party. They had come together as a group, and he was trying to make her his girlfriend. So she said, "But then you're not a hero." But I, reading the story the next day, said, "But the child was saved. The heroic deed was done. So what difference does it make if he was impressing his girlfriend?" And so, why are we bothering with the intentions of the actor when a child has been saved? And this leads one really to ask the question, how do you judge a moral worth? Do you judge moral worth on the basis of consequences of actions or on the intentions of the moral actor? The stories in chapter 2 and 9 in this book raise the same questions and in some ways do it even more powerfully. When it comes to governments and actors in the government, most people, all of you have been actors in the government. You know, the public, we generally expect to judge actions of the government based on consequences. If a politician does a great deed, like saving this child, we know he's doing it to get re-elected, but it doesn't bother us. And in a real way, we should ask this question about a story that we all know, and that is the story, the difficult case of Lalit Modi. the founder of the IPL. And I mean, we all know how much good the IPL has done. It's created hundreds of new cricketers, given them a life, taken India to the top of cricket, given millions of fans so much pleasure night after night for 6 weeks in a year, and made the owners of those cricket teams rich beyond their dreams, delivered thousands of crores in taxes to the government. And yet, Lalit Modi is treated like a crook because I suppose I should say allegedly, but let's not get, I don't think he's going to get me into trouble. But many people believe that he made money under the table, and there's enough evidence for the court to send him to jail. So he's currently a fugitive from justice. And if he were to come here, he'll surely spend the rest of his life in jail. But the question is, how do you judge this hero? How do you judge this? I mean, the fact is that from a legal point of view, he has obviously done wrong. I mean, it's done wrong. And so what does your moral compass tell you? And there are stories like these. There's a case of 2 engineers, Kargil war, time before the war. They have to build a road in record time, 2 separate roads, and one of the engineers does a superb job, gets it ready on time, but in the process makes a lot of money under the table. The other guy is completely honest, but he doesn't deliver the road on time. The fact is that road of the corrupt engineer actually saves the country during the war in terms of getting the supplies there. So another case of a moral dilemma. And of course, there are many such dilemmas, many cases when the law is bad. So the dilemma is whether the law, what is the moral worth of that thing? I'm not going to hold you. My 5 minutes are up. So thank you for writing the book, and thank you for giving me a chance to write an introduction. And the next person is...
Now I request Sri Shyam Saran to come in. What does your moral compass tell you in diplomacy?
So my batchmate, Hardayal Singh ji, a great pleasure to be here this evening at the launch of your book. And may I say that it has been an absolute pleasure to read your book because all the stories that you have narrated, in terms of what you have said, a moral compass, I think what it does show is that each one of us has to perhaps find his own compass. I doubt whether there is one single compass that we can all live by. Each one of us has to make his own decision. I think what emerges for me is, as an individual, that if I can, every morning when I'm looking at the mirror, if I can look straight into my own eyes without feeling, anxious or somehow, not comfortable with myself, then there is obviously, there has been some deviation from the moral compass. So I think for me, it is a very simple standard that is it possible for me to look at myself in the morning and feel comfortable with myself. That is perhaps one easy way of looking at a moral compass. I think the story which Gurcharan spoke about, I think lots of good deeds are done in order to impress the opposite sex. So I think we should be happy with that kind of a innate tendency that we have as human beings. There is also the question of intent, which sometimes leads to negative consequences. But I have found, for example, as currently you find in our own current political kind of a situation that we have. I remember an NDTV interview of some villagers before the elections, where they were asking a lady in the village, you have this gas connection, you have a gas cylinder, and she says, I thank Prime Minister Modi for having made available this gas cylinder. And he asks, well, it doesn't seem as if you are using this gas cylinder. So she says, well, the refill is too expensive. So the NDTV reporter says, so you're not really impressed with Prime Minister Modi, are you? And she said, nahi, unki niyat theek thi. So obviously, at some point, this works. So the niyat is also sometimes important. The road building exercise that you spoke about in the book about one engineer who's very efficient but corrupt, but another engineer who's very honest but hasn't delivered. I think in judging the second person, I don't think we should blame his honesty for not having built the road. I think we should blame his incompetence for not having built the road. Honesty is not the issue there. So I think there is also perhaps some of those finer distinctions that we need to make. Diplomacy, and that's the last thing I would like to speak about. A lot of people think that diplomacy is all about deceit, that diplomats go and lie for their country, and that's their job. Well, my experience has not been quite like that. I don't think I have had all the time, to go and lie for my country. In fact, contrary-wise, I have found that, one of the most important qualities, I think, in a diplomat, and perhaps Pawan may wish to, comment on that, is credibility. You are able to do a much more effective job of diplomacy if your interlocutor does not doubt your credibility. There may be times where you cannot share information that you have because it is sensitive information, but that doesn't mean you mislead. If you mislead, and this is very quickly understood by your counterpart, that your credibility would have diminished. And therefore, next time when you are having that encounter, you will not get very far in terms of convincing him. If convincing the other side is part of diplomacy, then I think you would not be able to convince him. So even though diplomacy has the reputation of always dealing in deceit and deception, I would say that there are probably there is more value in not deceiving rather than in deceiving. I think that is certainly been my experience. Again, moral compass in terms of who you are and what you are doing may be different. So we talked about the government. With respect to government, I think there was a very simple, straightforward standard which was put forward by Mahatma Gandhi. That is, whenever you are taking any action, think whether this action is going to benefit the poorest of the poor in our country. If it does, it is good. If it does not, then maybe it is not so good. And I think that standard is perhaps a universal standard for governance. Lastly, it's also a question of human relations in whatever we do, in terms of whether it is dharma or adharma. One of the there is actually a management expert who put some very interesting principles for human interactions. He said, when you have to talk about something with another individual, or you are making a speech, one of the first things you should think about is this the right thing to say? What I'm going to say, is this the right thing to say? Second is this the right person to say what I'm going to say to? And third is this the right time to say what I'm going to say? And if you perhaps reflect before you do this, perhaps you would have a much better relationship with people than you would otherwise have. So just a few stray thoughts, Hardayal, on this occasion. And once again, my very, very warm congratulations to you on having produced an absolutely fantastic book. Thank you.
As the only politico on stage, Pawan, so share with us how you've negotiated the minefield.
He's also a diplomat.
Now you're in a view of that.
Thank you, Suhash. Let me begin by congratulating Hardayal Singh ji for a book I greatly enjoyed reading, if nothing else for its sheer sense of idealism. And I've written a blurb for the book where I express my admiration in trying to. The book makes you understand what could be right in difficult circumstances. But I want to say that the ethical choice of what to do is right is conditioned by what you think is right. There, unfortunately, the definition of right in the case of an individual is not so idealistic. Atal Bihari Vajpayee used to once wondered if Indians suffer from an ethical deficit. I think this is something we need to ponder about with this panel and this audience excluded from what I'm going to say, because here it's an honest gathering. But I sometimes ask myself if we as a people are predisposed to be moral or correct, or we do so under fear or compulsion, or in the secure knowledge that our incorrect behavior may not be known. Scandinavian countries, for instance, are often held up as a model of rectitude. I'm afraid in our case, I come across so often a situation where middle-class people sitting in their drawing room in the evening castigate corruption in high places, when in the day they have paid routinely a bribe to a policeman
or for some other matter where they need to get a file cleared, and so on and so forth. And incidentally, there is no contradiction of any guilt burden on such practice. So Mr. Saran said, when I look at myself in the mirror, I'm afraid most people look if their slight investment, bakshish, has paid off with a certain sense of satisfaction rather than of great disappointment. Of a job well done. Gurcharan Das ji spoke about means versus ends. Mahatma Gandhi believed that the means are as important as the end, and he was adulated in India for actually standing up for what he believed in. But this dictum of his never had spectacular following. And I often wonder, what is this tradition in our country? Is the end more important, or are the means as important as the end? In the Arth Shastra, for instance, Cordially writes, there is no moral underpinning to the retention of power of a state. He's very ruthless. He says, Sam, Dam, Dand, Bhed. Employ any upay in order to retain power. Gurcharan is an authority on the Mahabharata. I ask myself, because I've written a book on Krishna, and Krishna is one of our profound gods in terms of just the sheer loftiness of imagination, the many facets he has. But if you look at his role in the Mahabharata and judge it from whether the means are as important as the end, you ask yourself, what has been the traditional legacy to us? Drona, the guru of the Kauravas, is killed by deceit. Krishna persuades Yudhishthir, known for never speaking the untruth, to say Ashwatthama is dead in the hearing of Drona. It was known to Krishna and known to Yudhishthir that Drona is greatly loves his son called Ashwatthama. Now, an elephant had also died by the name of Ashwatthama, but when Yudhishthir says it in front of Drona that Ashwatthama is dead in the middle of the battle, it has the desired effect, and Yudhishthir knows he is doing deceit. He lays down his arms. Karna is killed not by means which are the most honorable. In his battle with Arjun, he gets down from the chariot because its wheel has got stuck in the ground. And according to the rules of war, then, you are not supposed to attack somebody who's unarmed. But Krishna, because he's looking at the end, that you have to defeat adharma. And the Kauravas stand for adharma. So he says, kill him now. And Arjun does so. You have the example after example of this nature. I mean, Bhishma and Duryodhan's fight. And Krishna is watching the battle intently, and he tells Arjun that Bhim cannot win this against Duryodhan by fair play. So at an appropriate time, he hints, he shows Bhim that the vulnerable spot of Duryodhan is his thigh. Now, again, according to the rules of war, then you're not supposed to hit below the belt. But on Krishna's urging, Bhim does, and Duryodhan dies. What I'm trying to say is, there was some talk about dharma also. Because I've seen it in the bureaucracy, I see it in politics. What I'm impressed about is that we are harmonious schizophrenics. our public outrage at corruption is entirely compatible with deviations in private practice. And you know what Hardayal Singh ji writes is an inspiration if you are convinced that this is wrong. But for a great many of us, we believe it is not wrong. I mean, any invocation to Goddess Lakshmi, an extremely popular goddess, stands for wealth and prosperity. Show me any arti which says that we must make wealth as an end in itself only through moral means. In fact, it says if you have wealth, सब कुछ आ जाता है. ज्ञान आ जाता है, respect आ जाती है, dignity आ जाता है. So, I mean, I'm saying that you have to take into account tradition. It was mentioned about dharma. Now, you know, it's such a sophisticated concept. He's written about it. I've written about it in my last book, The Great Hindu Civilization. It's a very sophisticated concept. There are no 10 commandments in India, as in Christianity. And dharma lays down a normative framework of correct behavior, but it takes into account the context of a situation. So sometimes nothing can be wrong. According to the Hindu worldview, you cannot do anything wrong if you act according to your swadharma. You cannot do anything wrong if you have acted according to your ashram dharma. You cannot have done anything wrong if you have acted in terms of kula dharma. And you cannot have done anything wrong if you have acted in apad dharma, which is what you need to do in moments of crisis. There's no moral imperative not to behave in a certain manner. So dharma is a matter of personal judgment. I mean, Duryodhan, when he reaches heaven, is garlanded by the gods for being such a brave warrior. Irrespective of his covetousness, his greed, his deceit. So sometimes you wonder what is the legacy that we are dealing with. And there are moral dilemmas which are very interesting because of this notion of dharma. If a man who is starving and on the verge of death breaks an apple from a rich man's orchard, is he to be punished because he's stealing? Or is there a context for his action which mitigates it? That is why, out of nuance, sophistication, intellect, examination, and in-depth thinking, we have given a nuanced character to dharma, in which the conscience of an individual must operate as he or she sees best. So these stories are inspirations for us. But if you are looking for guidance, either in a role model in politics or by example elsewhere, no mirror shows real guilt. And today, this sophisticated nuance of dharma, this ideal of ends as important as their means, the whole thing has been reduced to its lowest common denominator, distorted beyond belief into a situation where, irrespective of the means, only the end is important. Can topple governments, legislators can travel from chartered planes from one 5-star hotel to another. I mean, you had a case, I'll just end with that. Sukhram, to be a minister. For months, the BJP agitated against his corruption and the pile of cash found under his bed. Stopped parliament. Then the elections took place. Sukhram moved to the BJP. He was exceptionally important for forming the government, and BJP admitted him. And of course, these days I can give you example after example. And nobody felt guilty. And by the way, Sukhram won the election because the people in his constituency were least bothered that he's corrupt, because for them he was a patron who could give them benefits. So in other words, what I'm saying is, the problem is far more complex. We all need to introspect. And ultimately, I feel it is only the neutral interface of technology where you can pay income tax online without a human interaction, where you can pay property tax, where you can get a driving license, unlike in the past, which will eliminate ultimately corruption, not because we are predisposed to be moral, at least in this country. Thank you.
Now we just have a interaction between the panelists and then go to a Q&A session. So Pawan, if I could ask you the first one, and then we could discuss it. But what does the book reveal about the values of the modern Indian professional classes? Do you elaborate on that?
I think what I said covers all classes. Really, I believe it. The professional classes, be it in the bureaucracy or otherwise, today I find often verge on the side of compliance because the regime has become of a certain nature, not the government, but the financial regime, digital payments, which can be tracked, etc. But in essence, I was talking about the absence of a clear moral imperative which makes a person feel guilty about when they do unethical behavior. That is missing. And we have all to find it. And as I said, that is why the book is important.
I'd like to, I'm not going to disagree, but I'm going to suggest, Pawan, that yes, it's a common thing. The other day at a party, somebody said, "Oh, all Indians are corrupt." And the thought I want to suggest is that if you're talking about character and culture, you're making a statement of character and of national character, then the same Indian who'll take an 8-hour flight, reach Heathrow Airport, cross the line of immigration, and after that, the person will go out on the street, will not spit on the street, will not pay a bribe to the policeman at the red light, will pay his taxes when you should. So how can culture change within 8 hours? And so what I'm suggesting, I don't think I have an answer, but what I'm suggesting is a lot of things we talk about as being characteristics of national culture are reflections more of governance regimes. And I'm glad you brought out the question, the digital payment thing, that there is a study underway and the results are expected shortly, but initial results seem to suggest that the biggest change actually in the country has happened, and that is the incentive system. That digital payments, digital tracking have made people much more accountable. And therefore, and if we just wait another few years for this system to really become even more prevalent and more sophisticated, I think you'll find the governance system will also have changed. So I am very shy of making cultural stereotypes or national stereotypes.
No, it's not my intention to make a stereotype. But you asked a question in this context that what changed in 8 hours? The individual changed less, but the culture was different, where he had to comply with rules which he could not escape. Essentially, I'm just saying that, there is a gap between ought and is. If we continue to speak only of the ought, that this is how it ought to be, without recognizing the impediments of the is, you'll never be able to bridge the gap. So I think it's important to be truthful about ourselves and then look at ourselves in the mirror.
See, I would like to comment on what my two eminent panelists have said so far on the basis of my own experience. In the government, we often find two set types of people. One who are so tied up with the rules that they forget that they get paid for achieving certain outcomes or results. The others are so impatient of the rules that they only bother about the results. Both types run into trouble. In fact, interestingly, it was a director of the CBI who brought to our notice, and very correctly, he said, you have to follow the rules, otherwise the CBI will be after you, and you have to get results. So one cannot be at the expense of the other. The only thing is that when you are going through the rules, you should not get so tied up that you forget that, there is something beyond the rules also. And of course, we have to draw a distinction between results and outcomes also. Very often people achieve results, but there are no outcomes. For example, a school principal may say that, look, I have ensured that teachers come on time, that teacher absenteeism is reduced, that enrollment has increased. But yet, when you test the student of the 4th class, he cannot even do sums which are meant to be done by a student of class 2. So in that case, what has happened is he's following the rules, he's getting the results, but still the outcomes are missing. The outcomes are ultimately the, the ultimate product by which society will judge you.
Hardy, can I just ask you to talk a bit about, I think it's a difficult proposition, but the case of the coal secretary at Gupta, where does he come in?
See, I would be very reluctant to talk about individual cases. You see, there's a reason for it. First of all, you can't be judgmental about these things only on the basis of media reports. You must have all the file in front of you, and you must be able to see what evidence has been led, whether it is enough to substantiate a charge. First of all, you have to decide whether, if you're going to charge sheet a person, whether there is enough material to charge sheet a person. After a charge sheet has been served on him and an inquiry has been conducted, you must see what the inquiry has shown and whether after that there is enough evidence to punish the person or not. Now, I'm glad you've asked this question, Suhas. Basically, we are living in a very imperfect world. When I talk to you about the 18,000 cases which I dealt with, I have to say, in all honesty, that I was very sad because some very bright careers had to be nipped in the bud, merely because they had violated some rule or the other. But because they had caused so much loss to the government, they could not have been allowed to continue. On the other hand, you see, these people were good, they were honest, but they said we were only following a market practice. Correct? Now, we said a market practice cannot trump your banking manuals. So therein lay the dilemma for us. But we were very clear about what we had to do. I mean, a person like me said that, look, I must go by my brief. But at the same time, I was equally sad that there were so many people who deserved to be punished, but they did not lead a shred of evidence. So they had to be exonerated. And this is life. That is why this title is Finding Balance and Purpose in an Imperfect World.
Yeah, we'll just come to you in a minute. Shyam Saranji, would you like to say something on the Indian middle class and how it negotiates?
Well, I don't know whether I would like to talk about the middle class negotiating life, but let me make a couple of points relating to what Hardayal has said. You know, I would make a distinction between observing rules and observing a moral code. These are not equivalent. That somebody has not quite followed the rules, is that immoral? Not necessarily. To give you an example, I mean, I have found that, you know, we talked about loss because some rule was not followed, therefore there was a loss. How much of government money is lost because people are not taking decisions? So is that something that you should punish somebody for? That because you did not take the decision at the appropriate time, the government of India, instead of spending 10 crores on the project, had ended up by spending 25 crores on the project. You know, I mean, it is not so simple to just say that, you know, you must observe rules. Second thing is that, you know, not observing rules or interpreting rules in government, you know, you must allow your people to make mistakes because people also learn from mistakes. So mistakes should not be equivalent to immoral behavior. I think that distinction is very important. If you do not allow in any service, I mean, this is something quite, I think, quite normal in private sector, that, you know, people will make mistakes when they are working, and sometimes great lessons are learned from the mistakes that you make. That is something important. And as I said, with regard to the professions, I would make a distinction between, you know, immorality as it is related to observing rules and regulations, and morality, which I think is a somewhat higher code. And yes, it is true that it is contextual. It also depends upon what kind of a situation you find yourself in. And yes, there may be people who look in the mirror and feel very happy because their bribe has been successful. That is his dharma. Maybe may not be my dharma, but maybe it is his the dharma. So I think perhaps we need to also take some of these aspects into account. Like to say.
Yeah, I would just add that certainly, you know, I've spent my career in the private sector, and you find people have spent your careers in the public sector. And the one striking thing that I have observed is that the private sector is not as rule bound as the government is. That there is a pragmatism and this pragmatism runs throughout, and the pragmatism doesn't mean to suggest a lack of morality, that you're amoral, because a businessman fundamentally knows that if he misclaims something to a consumer, that he will get punished because the person will not buy the product second time. Or if he tries to squeeze a supplier too hard, every person, every purchase manager in every company tries to squeeze the supplier. And if you squeeze the supplier, the product you get at the end is actually going to, the component will make your product inferior because the person just couldn't deliver in the price that was given. So similarly, if you treat your employees badly, the best people won't join your company. So these are basic things that in the business world, the kind of almost like a dharma of capitalism. People don't think there is such a thing as that, but if there is one, these are instinctive things you have learned. I guess the main point I was trying to make is that I think that our government should try and do, say, what you've just suggested. And in fact, Pawan also hinted at that we do need, that there should be a difference between rules and doing the right thing. And that, I mean, the famous play Antigone is based on that, where she tells the king that your rules, your laws are bad, and I'm going to break your law because it's bad. But it's sort of a Gandhian approach to it. Anyway, enough.
Okay, we'll take, Shashi there, come.
Can you give the mic to her, please?
Yeah.
I just wanted to make, if I may be so presumptuous as to say a bit of a correction in the discussion going on, because when we use the scriptures to point out the dilemmas, moral dilemmas of how to win a dharmic war through our dharmic means, we are actually not giving the true foundation and basis of what is dharma. And that is given in our scriptures in the form of the 4 legs of dharma, which is actually the 4 legs of dharma are satya, tapasya, karuna, and shauch. These principles I have seen actually practiced amongst the sannyasis and saints in the sannyas world. With respect to the examples given by you, almost all of them are in the realm of vyavhar. So there are 2 scenarios. One is,
Can you hold the mic up?
one is parmarth, where these things are non-negotiable and there's a clear dharma. And the other is vyavhar, where pragmatism counts. And the entire discussion has gone on the pragmatism. But with respect to parmarth, I have actually seen, if you take a newborn child, you will see the child as it grows almost automatically is moral, also almost automatically veers towards truth, towards trust, towards love. So that, to my mind, indicates that the natural course of events, as nature has designed it, is moral in nature. And that is recognized in our scriptures by something known as the moral order, which is called Rita. Rita is the moral order which prevails in the universe. And that is why the spiritual people have followed that and achieved certain heights. But what we are doing is taking vyavharic examples where pragmatism is a necessary rule, either for survival or for in good conscience. Sometimes you have to bend and break rules. That to my mind is permissible, because even when you take the Mahabharata example, you take all selective cases of where Krishna broke the rules, but you don't follow the overall order, that there is a moral order which must prevail. So I think that when we quote a land as great as this, where we have had rishis and munis who've actually exemplified and illustrated the highest forms of moral order, we do have idealism, we do have examples. And the examples just of vyavhar are not sufficient to my mind to say that dharma is subjective.
Yeah,
That's
thank you.
all.
Thank you.
That's
Yeah,
all.
go ahead. Yeah. You keep the mic.
I want to ask you, this is a serious question. I want to ask you one thing. What do you make of a society where some people are human beings and others are not? Seriously, some people are part of this dharma or the moral compass. Some people are not. For instance, I'll give you a small example of what's happening right now. I mean, rapists, they've gang raped a woman, they've been indicted by the High Court, they're released, and people give them mithai, touch their feet. Okay, it's happened to a woman. So what? We are out of your sphere of human beings. We are. It doesn't matter, a few women are raped, so what? It's been happening for eons, Chalta hai. If it happens to minorities, it's okay. And if it happens to the poor, so what? There has to be development. So I want to ask you, what do you make of this so-called moral compass when some of us are just out of it?
Okay, fine. Yeah. Yeah. Just make it brief, please.
Yeah, it's going to be brief. Two things. The super tech towers which were destroyed, this is at a huge cost to the country's resources. Was there a dilemma over there also about corruption versus loss of resources?
Fine.
And secondly, in the bigger context, what do they do in China? They are equally corrupt, but with corruption, they also deliver the promised result.
Okay.
So would that help our country
Yeah,
if
what's the problem?
5 times growth?
Fine.
Thank
Give
you.
the mic.
Thank you, Suhas. I shall try to be as brief as possible. It was mentioned that technology can help us, of course, but I want to bring to your notice one instance where technology has not helped. That is, in these electronic voting machines, we also have a paper trail, and it was introduced at a high cost, thousands of crores, so that, the discomfort which the voter has, whether his or her vote has been correctly recorded, can be removed. But the Election Commission refuses to count. So technology does not always help because it depends on the intentions. Now, second point is intentions and consequences. Shri Gurcharan Das earlier, not now, said, there is a disjunction between intentions and consequences. So I want to ask him a thought experiment. A political party has been governing a state with a lot of corruption. Another political party buys up the MLAs, I wouldn't say with or without corruption, you can imagine, and provides good governance. So would you say that it was a good thing? Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead. I think that would be the last panelist.
See, my question is more fundamental. I mean, the moral, ethical, the standards of righteousness in the country, the way people have stooped to in general. How would it ever improve in a country where almost all political parties run on unaccounted money to exist, to survive, to fight elections? If you look at how it happens, the people who fund elections, once the party comes to power, they want to extract their pound of flesh. Look at a typical entrant to the political arena today. He or she starts as an apprentice just by hanging around politicians as a small-time guy at the cost of, and at his cost or her cost, at the cost of his or her time, everything. And once that party comes to power, extract the maximum, gain out of the party being in power. So how would this ever change unless the political system changes? I don't have a solution, but is state funding of elections a possible solution? How would this value chain ever get broken?
Yeah, just the last one. Yeah, give the mic. No. Just...
Very simple question to the author. Not on any of these complicated questions. Was there any method in your ranking the stories 1 to 17, a particular way you chose it, or is it just a random? Just simple question.
I can answer it in one sentence. It's at random.
Good. Thank you.
As I thought them, as I imagined them,
Yes.
or as they came to my mind.
Would you like to take up that comment that Shashi asked?
No, I understand where you're coming from, Shashi, but at least to my understanding, at the paramarthic level, no rules exist and all moral rules exist. Because that individual has reached a place of turiya or beyond, where the conventional laws of the world no longer apply. But they are inherently so, so they have gone that they are moral by instinct, temperament, action, and inclination. So I don't think we were going there. We were talking about what happens when moral choices are made at the Vyavaharik level. If we all evolve to become paramarthics, then of course the discussion is of no consequence.
I just like to though add something to what she said. And that's a very small point. You know, philosophers have been interested for decades in the question of how the moral sentiment emerges in human beings. And there was a Swiss psychologist, Piaget, who did an experiment. He took a piece of cake to a birthday party of three-year-olds. And in front of them, he made very precise slices of the cake. But one piece he made double the size. And he gave it randomly, not to the birthday kid, but to another kid. Everybody knew something had gone wrong here. And that kid who got double the slice started crying, as to look, my God, as though he had been in some ways insulted. And so the notion, I think what Piaget was showing is that there is very early on, a child gets this idea of distributive justice, that is justice as fairness, that there's something of you're being unfair is something that children say to each other all the time. Anyway, you mentioned that how this idea comes up early. And I'll just add this because evolutionary scientists have been, from Darwin onwards, were interested in this idea of how the moral sentiment, because they posited the notion that human beings are selfish, they have to survive. In order to survive, they have to look after their own self-interest. So then why does a human being behave in an altruistic way, helping someone when you don't need to? And Darwin actually got the big insight, but later studies were done which showed that actually human beings have discovered that when they are good to another person, that person more often than not will reciprocate. And these are friendships. And so it's in your own survival. It's in your own interest to behave well. And there's a lot of studies, very interesting games that have been created to illustrate this. Anyway, I think we are not answering all the questions, I'm afraid.
Is it on? Yeah. What Gurcharan was talking about just now is, I think, illustrated by one gentleman in our income tax department, there are income tax people here, all of you would know him. He used to say, God has given you two hands, you give with both. And he lived his life in the department throughout. He was not known for any great technical skills, but people love and admire him till today. Basically because he believed in what Gurcharan is talking about, this kind of altruism. He would not look to you, whether you're a good person or a bad person. All he wanted to know was, do you need any help and can I help you? If he could, he would. And mind you, people asked, how has he been able to survive for so long? Is he just lucky? that he, went through 35 years and came out totally, not only unscathed, but lived a life which, people admire till today. So I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. There's one chapter in the book on this person.
I just want to make a quick comment. Sagari mentioned some examples, but what is important is that even for the ordinary person to aspire to be moral, you need role models in society. You need somebody to look up to. Gandhi ji, by the sheer dint of his convictions, his courage, personality, and action, converted single-handedly this nation, certainly before the freedom struggle and afterwards in the beginning stages of the evolution of independence, to a certain premium on correct behavior. Bureaucrats of the past, in the early years, basket of fruits comes on Diwali, they'll pick up one apple and return the rest. Do you know what bureaucrats are receiving these days? What I'm trying to say is, I don't even want to talk of politics. I'm just saying we've let standards drop and we lack role models. And about this thing, of course, I agree with Shashi and Gurcharan that no one is born immoral. And I think the inclination is towards morality, to be helpful. But when you are saying that reciprocal, Hardayal Singh with his earthy wisdom used to say, इसने मेरे खिलाफ क्यों ऐसा किया? मैंने तो इसकी मदद नहीं की थी. Why do you hate me? I have not helped you. I mean, it's a way, and therefore I am reminded, when you talk of how somebody who could be moral becomes immoral, of this couplet of Faiz. दिल से तो हर मुआमला करके चले थे साफ हम. दिल से तो हर मुआमला करके चले थे साफ हम. कहने में उनके सामने बात बदल गई. So this is the dilemma.
I think we have to close the meeting now.
Can I just, in the last closing thought, because we have talked about moral dilemmas, and Pavan gave some very interesting examples from the Mahabharata. And there's one real moral dilemma there, which is, I think, illustrates to me the greatness, in a way, of the epic, because it's a case of a dilemma between Satya and Ahimsa. Both Satya and Ahimsa are considered part of Sadharan Dharma, that is Dharma to all and all. It's not Swadharma, so it's higher than Sadharan Dharma. And it's the Dharma that actually Buddhism took out of from there. That anyway, there's a Rishi Kaushik who sits in the town square, and he's known as a man who's never told a lie. And a man runs past him, is fleeing for his life, and he's followed a few minutes later by a bunch of people who are trying to catch him. Now, Kaushik knows that what's the story here. He knows that they are crooks. They're pursuing him because he has been a witness to their crime. And they want to kill him before the matter goes to the court. And so these people who are pursuing ask him, "Oh, kahan gaya? Where did he go?" And he says, "Now shall I tell the truth? I've always told the truth." So he tells the truth, "Wahan gaya." So he's quite happy that he has upheld his dharma of Satya. But then he lands up in hell. And then he wants to know, why am I in hell when I've been honest all my life? And that's where the keeper of hell tells him that, you idiot, your job that day was to save this man's life, ahimsa, and not uphold your satya. I mean, this is a very simple-minded story, but it really does, stories like these do bring out the, I think in some ways, the sophistication of our tradition. Now, it doesn't, I mean, there is a school of thought which Pawan hinted at, the fact that we don't have 10 commandments, and therefore there's a deficit in our personalities. Now, that is another issue. But I just wanted to tell you that dharma, as Sham pointed out, by nature, dharma is sukshma, is subtle. And therefore, there often are no black and white answers in our imperfect world.
Just one second.
So, yeah, may I, before Suhas closes, may I thank HarperCollins for all the cooperation they gave us in organizing this function today.
About black and white, I would just like to say a few lines I wrote some years back. It is black or white. There are no gray tones. It's Gandhi or Godse. So anyway, now I think the other thought which I want to leave after reading Hardayal's book is, quoting Nelson Mandela, that I win or I learn. So one doesn't lose ever. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much.